Yes.
Okay, good. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. I have a recurring guest from other shows on. I'm starting to not be able to keep track of all the shows I've had. And so we're the guests, sort of like, are categorized. But S.A. Barnes, local author who works at Mundelein High School, and is, again, we were just talking about how I was looking at a Wikipedia page because she has one and I don't. And even though I've had so many shows, anyway, that she's actually written quite a bit, and I was, not so playfully saying that she's going to be like the next Stephen King because she's going to be able to bust out 8 billion books in like 10 years, like he's known for doing. Yeah, so welcome back. Thanks for hanging out, and talking to us. I know so Dead Silence that I read and loved was your last book, right?
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I handed it to a couple of people that I know that are sci-fi buffs and loved it. Both of them, the two I'm thinking of now, loved it. Absolutely loved
it. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're a profound writer, and that one was written from second person, right? First person.
First person. Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's not easy to do. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, second person. That's weird. We talked about that before. Like very few.
A little bit, yeah.
Very few people do that because it's a very odd thing. It's like you're whatever. Anyways, tell us about
Choose Your Own Adventures book, from the
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You're the character in the story, which is odd.
Yes.
Anyway, tell us about what's been going on with you as far as writing goes and life in general, and tell us about the new book coming up.
Sure. Yeah. It's been busy and wonderful. February of 2022, which has been 2 years ago, which is hard to believe.
That is,
it went by really fast.
That was fast. Right.
It's, I was really excited that a lot of people seem to connect with it, which is fantastic. I mean, you always want that as a writer, but especially for a book that I really felt like I put a big chunk of myself into. That's always a nice validation when other people are like, yeah, I get this. This is, even though this is, set in space and has weird things happening, I can figure this out. I'm part of this story. I can relate to this. So that was very cool. In the meantime, I signed another contract for 2 more books with Nightfire, which is the horror division of Tor. And they're fantastic. I love working with them. Yeah. So the first of those 2 books is coming out in April of this coming year. And that one is Ghost Station. And I've actually already turned in a draft of the 3rd book. And I'll be getting edits on that shortly. And that'll be coming out in 2025, I think. But we're still like way early in the process on that one.
But the second one is technically, or like not technically, but it's finished, sort of. The second one,
I've turned in a first draft.
So
take that as you will. I mean, that could be, there's probably at least a couple rounds of edits in there. I'm hoping, as always with anything, that it's not like this, was interesting. Please start from page 1. I mean, they never quite say it that way. But I have had books where I've had to rewrite major sections, and you know what? It's always come out to be for the better of the book. So I'm happy to do it. But you always hope that you get pretty close to the mark on your initial draft, just because it's stressful to try to figure out how to redo it, because sometimes multiple versions of it already live in your head where you've gone, well, I thought about doing it this way, but then I didn't do it this way. And you're like, wait, what did I actually write? So it's easier if you can get it close to the mark the first time, but it doesn't always happen.
No, that is, it also isn't there like the artistic integrity of it too, that you don't want somebody else altering your vision of the story into like theirs.
I think that's one of the things you have to really watch for when you sell a book to a company and to an editor, is to make sure that you guys have a similar vision. Any editor that I've worked with, it's been very rare where I felt that they were asking me to do something that compromised my vision. In fact, most of the time they're trying to help me. When you write something, you're in the middle of it and you can't see it. You can't judge whether you have major point, whether you have accomplished making this character sympathetic or that their journey is clear. So I would say 98% of the time, any kind of edits I'm getting are the editors and the other team, people that I work with, trying to help me clarify that vision so that it comes up clearer and that people can get there faster, so it's not confusing.
That's right.
And I'm very fortunate. I'm really fortunate to work with some very awesome, smart people. So that has made a big difference.
Yeah, I bet. No, that's a good point. Having the company you're writing for be consistent with your own sort of artistic dispositions. I remember when I was going to college, there was another philosophy major who got an article accepted by some philosophy something or other, and she showed me the edited version. It was like 3/4 of it was blacked out.
Yeah.
Or at least 2/3. I'm always like, what's the point? You're like, yeah, she wasn't happy. So, like, I don't know if she went
Well,
through with it.
that's one of the things you have. I mean, that's one of the hard things, like, especially when you're first starting out and you don't have you feel like you may not have the flexibility to say no. I mean, the author always has the final right of, like, no, I'm not going to do this. But I try really hard. One of the things that I do is I try not to respond to anything. I try to give myself time to think about it. And I may bounce it off other people and say, hey, do you see what they're saying? Because I'm having trouble or whatever. But you do have to be careful. I mean, I think about it, things with a lot of things these days are mixed genre, blends of things, whether it's, sci-fi and horror, or it's, fantasy and romance. And a lot of times one
Mhm.
person's vision of the percentage, maybe off one direction or the other. And so I think you really have to make sure that you're on the same page with the team that you're working on and the company who's buying it, because they may want to be selling, I don't know, cran apple juice, but you're like, no, 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 this is definitely cran grape or whatever, like, you need to make sure that
That's a good analogy.
you're not going, that you're both like on the same page about what this book is supposed to be. And I think that's one of the reasons when you're starting out as an author that they want you to have a completed manuscript. They may go through and make suggestions, but they have the whole draft to work with. Whereas when you're a little farther along, sometimes you can sell it on proposal, which is, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 pages and a synopsis. And there's a little more risk in there because it's on both sides, because it's unknown.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And like, how many editors have their hands on your manuscript? That is it, just one?
So I have, very fortunate that I have agents who are actively involved, and who will read and offer suggestions usually before it goes to submission, or if I have questions. So I have two of those. And then I believe I have my primary editor, and then I have another editor who also, I think they always have multiple people look at it because they want to make sure, everybody has a just slightly different perspective, and they want to make sure that they're covering their ground. So I don't get 6 rounds of edits. I get 1 round, with everybody kind of consolidated. And my agents and I usually have given me they've usually given me feedback before it even goes to the editors at the publishing house. So, but I know for sure that at least two look at it when it goes to Nightfire, at least.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I knew a guy who
Mm-hmm.
was an editor of, like, I think textbooks, school textbooks. That
Sure.
that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind
Uh-huh.
of degree you would need to get, like, to become an editor. Probably in the respective field you're dealing with. I'm guessing.
Actually, my sister, who works as a fiction editor, she worked for Hachette in New York, so it's for Orbit and Red Hook, and then she came back here about 5-6 years ago and worked for McGraw Hill, and so
Oh,
she was a textbook editor. But what was interesting about that is, you're right, you have to have somebody who is familiar with the content. So you have, like, subject matter experts who are content experts. So in those cases, the editing is really more project managing, as far as I understand it. Whereas in fiction, which is what she does now, she runs her own business. You're the one with your hands in the guts, trying to, like, make sure the story, flows, and you're editing sentences. Whereas, if you're if you're managing a textbook about geometry, if the geometry guy says it's got to be this way, then it's got to be that way.
right, right, exactly. This is proportionality. This is ratio. You don't know the difference between the two. You're probably going to screw up the editing. Um, that's it. Yeah, I used to, like, edit some people's papers in college, which I thought was interesting and fun. I do it for free, whatever else, but I really enjoyed it because, I mean, studying philosophy, you kind of have to be really good at writing and grammar and that, because the philosophy professors are such animals. They would just berate you in front of everybody. It's just out of fear that you become good at writing. They're just pompous anyway. But it was a lot of fun. I remember, like, I had a med student friend who obviously is extremely intelligent, because you can't be a med student and not be smart. But he was terrible. His grammar was awful. I mean, just awful. Misuse of commas. I remember he gave me something to read. I'm like, really? I mean, do you want me to edit the content or the grammar? He's like, there's something wrong with the grammar. I'm like, oh yeah. So you could, my point being, going back to like the editors or like, specific content versus something else. You can be good at one part of it and not good at another part of it. The grammar is something totally
Yes.
separate from the meaning of the words, of the semantics. I'm saying, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
that's
I
very
mean,
cool.
it's the same way too with, I mean, when you're going through editing, you have an editor who's going to go through for what they call a dev edit, or a substantive edit, where they're like going through, that's when they're going through the story and they're making sure that, the character arc makes sense, that
Right.
you didn't, there's that famous story, and I can't think of who the writer is. He was a murder mystery writer like in the 30s and 40s and had written all these books and wrote them like super fast. And, at the beginning, he kills off somebody at the beginning, like kills the butler at the beginning of this mystery. And someone says to him, when the book comes out, well, whatever happened? How did that work? Because it couldn't have been the person. He's like, oh, I completely forgot about that guy. So
Right.
there's an editor who is making sure all of that makes
Right.
sense. But then you also have copy editors who are going in and checking. And I always fight. Copy editors are brilliant. But I worked in copy editing for a long time, and I have very strong feelings about commas. So we frequently end up butting heads. And I'm like, leave my Oxford commas alone. I want them in there.
But you would say that, or they would say that?
I say that.
Okay.
I want them in.
Yeah.
I want them in. So
Well,
there's a
that's
lot of
interesting.
back and forth.
Commas are probably, in my experience, the most controversial part of punctuation. When to use them, when not to use them, when it's necessary, when it's stylistic, that kind of thing. Like I even as like, somebody who can write up somewhat technically, I like using commas for style. When I feel the pause in my head, I
Yes.
throw a comma in there. Okay, even though
Yes.
grammatically it doesn't have to be there, that kind of thing. But I want
100%.
you as the reader, I want you to pause while you're reading the sentence and then go on. I want to create like a processing in you that I want you to have. Right.
I have a funny story about that. I was it was one of my earlier books, and I didn't realize I was doing it, but because I think exactly that same way, when I pause, I'm pausing in thought. If I'm I want somebody else to pause. Well, it turned out every time I was kind of pausing to figure out what I was going to say next or where the story was going to go, I'd put a comma in without
Right.
even realizing. It was completely subconscious. And finally, a copy editor or an editor's like, I think this is what you're doing.
Right.
And I want you to be aware of it so that you're not inadvertently, because
Right.
I was putting them in really random areas. And I'm like, okay, yeah, so now I'm more aware of that in because, you stop, you're like, and they're like, well, which way should this go? In the meantime, I've already put a comma. And I'm like, I'm going to go on again and I don't catch it.
That's funny. The comma was for your pause in thinking. Like, okay, hold on a second, pause, comma. Okay, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to the reader, grammatically or stylistically. That's funny.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so can you tell us anything about the new book coming out besides what you already have? I mean, without giving it away.
Yeah, so Ghost Station is not connected to Dead Silence. It's not a sequel. You can perceive it as being in the same universe if you want.
The title kind of says it is, doesn't it?
Well, you've got
sounds like it could be.
It could be. Yeah, you've got Dead and you've got Ghost,
right.
But Ghost Station actually comes
Station.
from a term. It's not though. So Ghost Station actually comes from a term based. And I always screw up Arctic and Antarctic, but
ant
they
is
have
below,
science.
Arctic is above. Ant is below. Think of an anthill. Ants going into an anthill.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. That helps me. Yeah. But they have, science stations, and what happens is, a country, builds a science station or a monitoring station, and then they just, when their mission is over, when the funds run out, whatever, they just leave it. So there's all these stations kind of dotting, that are basically abandoned stations. They're called ghost stations. So that's really where that came from. And go ahead.
I said that's very cool.
Oh, okay. So what I wanted to do, thank you.
Sure.
So what I kind of wanted to do was this idea of, basic premise of this is we're ahead in the future farther than we were in Dead Silence, right? So I think it's 2199 in this one. So we're farther ahead and we're out in other solar systems. And in this version of the world, corporations are doing what corporations do, which is they're claiming planets. Like this one looks like it might have good mineral rights. This one looks like we get fresh water, blah, blah, blah. Well, they had to create a treaty because basically otherwise, the Amazons of the world are going to claim everything. And then nothing's going to be left for anybody else. So basically they kind of had to put some restrictions around it. You have to maintain residency on these planets or in orbit around these planets for a certain number of weeks in order to have an official claim on them. And you have claim jumping and, whatever. So this team, who is the center of this book, they are a reclamation and exploration team. And they work for a company called Montrose. And Montrose has just acquired rights to a bunch of planets. And they're going to go out and, basically survey, see what's going on there, take data back to the scientists or send data back to the scientists. They are explorers, sort of, in the sense that, they're the ones being sent out because they're the the less valuable people in the sense. They're disposable. Our main character is actually a psychologist, because one of the things that is happening now is with people living and working in space, we're developing issues with, the lack of sunlight, the disrupted circadian rhythms. It's kind of based on this thing called winter over syndrome, which is a thing that happens in the Arctic and Antarctic. When you're dealing with that, when you don't have sunlight, it can cause things like depression, anxiety, hallucinations, violence, suicide. It is a real thing.
Yeah.
So I based it on that. And I'm like, well, when we go out into space, if we're living and working out there, we're going to have this probably amplified, right? So it's called ERS, Eckhart-Riser syndrome. It's completely made up.
Oh, no, that's cool. I like that.
On winter over syndrome, essentially. So this team, who is the focus, I think they're team 357 or whatever. They're a group of 5 people. Well, they used to be a group of 6 people, but one of their team members died on their last mission. So our psychologist, Ophelia, who works for the same corporation, is sort of like tapped to go with them, or volunteers really, because she's had some crises in her professional life that have made her sort of eager to prove herself. So she's going to go along and figure them out and come back and, kind of give everything a chance on Earth to kind of calm down, right? They're going to a planet called Lyria 393c. It is a planet that is it's a locked, what do they call that? Locked rotation, locked. It doesn't turn. It's like, it's only facing one way all the time. So they're landing in they call it like the terminal zone, which is where it's always in twilight. So you're never completely it's always kind of dark there, and it snows and it's violent. There's violent storms, and that's where the hab is, where they're going to stay. And so they're supposed to stay there for a certain number of weeks. Ophelia has her own issues. Ophelia has stuff in her family that make her sort of unpredictable. There's always this sounds really terrible, but I think sometimes there are reasons that we go into certain fields. And sometimes I think people who are interested in psychology are interested in psychology because they're trying to understand themselves. Not all of them, obviously.
No, there's a lot of unstable, crazy psychologists out there. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what's going on with Ophelia. She's from a very wealthy family who owns a rival corporation, actually. That's why she went to go work for Montrose. And so there's some stuff going on there. She's really determined to prove herself. And this team does not want her there. There's some really awful hazing that goes on, which, by the way, was super fun to write.
That's awesome.
And, they get there. And the thing is this station, which they're expecting to be abandoned. It's not that big of a deal, but there are some signs there that things did not end the way that they should have ended, that things are not right there. And there are also, one of the things I'm also fascinated with, which comes into play in this story, is the Great Filter, which is kind of part of the Fermi paradox thing. And that's all related to, basically, the Fermi paradox is, why are we not, if life is so common, why are we not running into extraterrestrials around every corner, essentially? Why have we not heard anything, et cetera? And the Great Filter is one of these theories that you can only reach a certain point in development as a society or as a civilization before you either destroy yourselves or someone destroys you, or you destroy your own planet and you don't exist. So the idea is that any civilization sophisticated enough for us to be able to interact with them in space or detect them probably died. It could have died out thousands and thousands of years before we were ever even spacefaring, right? Because we've only been spacefaring since 1960s. Yeah. So that's kind of this idea, is that they're there on this planet. One of the appealing things about this is that there is this, these relics of this ancient civilization. That might be why the corporation wanted to land there, because it's kind of a cool thing to have. Again, corporations just gathering up whatever they can of any kind of value. And so that's part of what's playing into this too. It's just a creepy, weird planet where weird stuff is going on, and we don't exactly know these people, and she doesn't trust them and they don't trust her. And then, bad stuff starts to happen.
Wow. That sounds utterly fascinating. Yeah, no, that sounds like a very cool storyline. Sounds like there's some social commentary going on there. About,
I don't ever put it in there deliberately, but it's
I was going to ask you, did you do it on purpose? You don't do it on purpose?
Not really. I mean, I have some very strong feelings about the way that we treat corporations we treat corporations better than people, or as people. And I think that, there's only a certain point at which you can treat people as disposable, which is certainly what's happening here.
Yep.
Because I don't think it actually made it into the final draft, but there was a line in there basically where, someone is saying, well, they could send drones, or they could send, but you know what? Drones are expensive. People are cheap, because
wow.
Unfortunately, from that perspective, I'm not saying I believe that, obviously, but that's because, and there's another line in there where they're talking about this mining colony and how what they basically did was to avoid paying for food or shelter for these people. They basically, because in this situation, cold sleep is their version of cryostasis, whatever. They would just wake them up, make them work for a month, and then put them back to sleep, and then wake up another group, put them, you know what I mean? And it was just, and that's part of the reason why
like cattle
problem.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
That's the great, I don't know what you want to call it, American or capitalist motto is that, money is always more important than people. That is, it's utterly repulsive, but okay, back to your story. We can have you on, we can talk about, all sorts of PC issues.
Like I said, I don't set out to do this, but then I think about, part of the way it has to work. One of the things I love about Star Trek, for example, is that you have that optimistic, view of humanity. And I really do think we need that vision of that. But one of the reasons I like writing this sort of near science fiction, so we're not talking, where everybody's, we're still dealing with, we're still the new kids on the block trying to get out there and figure out these things and whatever, is that, we're still carrying our old habits with us. And I feel like in horror, especially, greed is such a powerful driver in so many of these stories. And so that fits really well with corporations.
Perfectly well. They're synonymous nowadays. No, it's very interesting. I mean, like, speaking of, and this was obviously on purpose, but it was like an episode of Star Trek, the first version, with William Shatner, that you didn't even notice until they said it. And it's weird when they had the alien people with black on one side and white on one side. And then the other side, like, the one was a master, one was a slave, and like the Star Trek people couldn't figure out what the difference was. And he's like, "Well, didn't you see that he has the black on this side?" Like, and that was it. That was the difference that enslaved one race and not the other. And it's just very powerful commentary. I
feel like
go ahead.
The best things about science fiction is that it gives you, I hope, the distance to consider some of those social struggles and problems that still exist, and in a way that doesn't feel, I hope, like somebody waggling a finger at you, but more like we've never thought about it that way, or are we really heading that far down the path that that we're going to end up this way? No. So there's a meme on Facebook that's like, I wrote this, have you seen this, where it's like some author going, I wrote this book called Don't Ever Build the Nexus Destroyer, or whatever it is, and they're like, 50 years later, look, we built the Nexus Destroyer from the book Don't Ever Build the Nexus Destroyer. And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I don't have the right name, but that's, there is a part of that that's part of this too, which is, well, we may end up doing it anyway. So
and that's a good book. It's like science fiction, and not just fiction, but science fiction has a certain potency in itself, besides just the social commentary. Also, like, technologically, I mean, the idea of like laser beams and rockets and spaceships and satellites literally came from science fiction. Yes. Well before it became manifest in our own lives. There's, I mean, the kind of innovation that, like, what's his name? Philip Dick, is that his name? Like the big guy?
Yeah, Philip K. Dick.
Like, didn't he invent like again, just theoretically, like, all sorts of shit that we do now? Sorry, I shouldn't swear. But this is supposed to be a family show. I swear on my other shows. But with like drones and androids and stuff, like robots and stuff, I think, and if it wasn't him, somebody else did. Whatever.
He wrote "Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep" or Electric Sheep or something like that. And that's Blade Runner. And then he also did whatever the basis is for Minority Report, which is fascinating because the more we're getting into, you know, I'm fascinated by all things true crime, right? And so one of the cool things that we're able to do now is these crimes that have been left unsolved, not for lack of trying, for 30, 40 years. You know, now they're going back and they're solving these because of genetic genealogy, where they're basically able to track people through family trees. And there's a part of you that thinks, like, you know, that could be abused. Right now it's not, because it's not possible, we're not at that stage, but it is interesting to contemplate that, you know. Are you going
yeah,
to
and I mean they have, like, what is it, in LA or San Francisco, they have like the little robot dogs, and they want to like fly drones around, and I was like, no, you're not doing that, that's crazy, you know.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to figure out where we draw the line and how comfortable we are with things. People freak out about auto driving cars, and well, they should. But I read an article that was really interesting, which is the problem is people, because of the attention on it, were like, oh no, there's been a fatal accident. And the person, you know, the writer was pointing out, like, do you know how many fatal accidents there are every day that involve human beings?
Right.
Like way more than, so like you're not comparing apples to apples, but that's because people have like two things that they believe. One, everybody believes they're a good driver. Like they did studies on this, and no one ever raises their hand and goes, yeah, no, I'm not so good. They all go, no, I'm good. It's everybody else that's the problem. Right. And then the other part of it is that they think that they want to be in control, that they will make a better decision. And obviously in some cases that might be true because we're still working on that technology. I, for one, I'm hoping that by the time I am my parents' age or older, that I will be able to get into a car and say, take me to the doctor's office, take me to the Walmart, because I feel like that's going to open up a lot of, you know, freedom for people who may not be able to drive themselves. So, you know, technology is amazing, but also, yeah, you got to watch it because we'll find a way to abuse it. I mean,
yeah, that, I mean, no, don't get me wrong, I love the idea of an automatic driving car. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, you could get rid of DUIs, you know,
right?
Just go drive your car to the bar, get drunk, and then sit in the back seat and have it drive you home, you know. So, you know, that kind of thing,
right? I mean, if you think about that, I mean, that's the thing, and that's what I would love to know. And I don't have enough information to speak, you know, really coherently on it, but you know, that's right. Like there are things that are dangerous. Obviously, in this situation, the technology doesn't always recognize pedestrians, doesn't always stop in time. There are problems with the technology because it's still being worked on. But then you've got to look at it, like think about all the deaths or injuries or, you know, really severe injuries, lives that have been changed that it may not have happened if you didn't have a drunk driver behind the wheel, if you didn't have someone who is elderly and doesn't know the difference between the brake and the gas in that moment. You know what I mean? I'm very interested in that.
No, I would, yeah, you're right. I'm sure they can get the technology up to that point, that level where it's going to minimize. You're not going to get rid of all risk in life.
No.
It's not going to happen. Or the goal is to minimize it as much as you possibly can. So
but I'm interested to see if we will. I'm curious if we will. There are stories that I've read, and don't ask me, I can't think of off the top of my head, where we've like put technology aside because it's like, oh, that makes us uncomfortable, that makes us nervous. We're more comfortable doing it this way, and it's like, right. No, but you're losing out. Like this is not. There was like some story about a car that like had, you know, was shaped in a different way or whatever and was supposed to be safer, and it was, and then it caused an accident or something, and they're like, nope, we won't make cars like this anymore. It's like, that was an overreaction. It was an overreaction. So I don't know, I'm fascinated by technology and society and how it interacts.
People think, you know, reason in very biased manners and not very objectively often, too often. I'm guilty of it. I'm not just including myself by any stretch.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, you get used to something, familiar with something, and any alternative to it, it strikes you immediately as uncomfortable, unfamiliar. I don't want to do this. I don't understand it, you know. But yeah, that's the
reason I'm not on TikTok.
What?
I don't know how to do TikTok, and I'm like, no, this feels uncomfortable. I'm not going to do it.
No, I have a couple of those blind spots too, especially for all the show. Like I don't understand Instagram very well, and like I actually was at work a couple weeks ago, and there's like a 15-year-old there. I'm like, how would I make a TikTok video? And there's like a little plus sign on the bottom. She's like, very, you know, kind of slowly, meaning mockingly, points at the team. I'm like, you don't have to be a smart aleck because I'm like, you know, 1,000 years old and you're 15. You know, so, no, it was really funny. Like, oh, okay, just press this button and do it. Okay, sorry, I didn't know that. So yeah, there's a learning
Like
curve.
with my I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, and I always joke with my oldest niece who's in college. I'm like, okay, so when we all switch over to holograms, and I freak out because I'm getting like a phishing hologram, where they're trying to get my bank information, I'm gonna call you and go, help me figure out my hologram problem because
I can't even.
I'm
I don't want to. I'm asking. I'm not very I'm spiritual, not religious, but so I don't know who I'm asking. But I want to stay alive until holograms come out. Like where you actually like your phone and like a 3D image of like you sits there and I can just talk to you. That's cool.
I mean, I really think we're not, you look at the technology, I don't think we're that far away. I just don't think we are. I mean, I think they're trying. I saw a thing this morning on the news. I want to say it was like CBS this morning. And they were talking about how the people are struggling with the Apple headset because, it does give you that cool 3D sort of like you could put the screen up on your whatever, but it's uncomfortable to wear. I'm like, well, you know what we
Heavy.
call that? Holograms, where you don't
Yeah,
have to wear it
100%.
on your face. But there's interesting things too with that. Like I have that in a book, the book that I just turned in. That is how so not Ghost Station, but the one that comes after that, which right now is being temporarily titled Cold Eternity. I think that's what we're going to end up calling it. Um, Holograms are the primary mode of communication. So how do you deal with privacy? How, you know what I mean? If you're somewhere out in public now, granted, a lot of people don't seem to care about having quiet phone calls, even without
Yeah,
holograms.
sure. Right.
But your doctor calls with some test results or whatever, and they're on the hologram and they're announcing, whatever, because there's no way to. So I don't know. There's some interesting things with that, but it's one of the things I have fun with whenever I'm writing these worlds is figuring out how our technology is going to change and exploring different options for that.
I love that. That's great. That's so cool. I love that. Yeah, it'll be. But we'll see what happens. The last time I asked any sort of spiritual deity to keep me alive was for the next set of Star Wars movies, the
Mm-hmm.
prequels. Well, that was a disappointment. So hopefully they'll give me the hologram. Hopefully they'll give me the hologram thing. So I
Oh my goodness.
yeah.
Are you talking about like Phantom Menace and that
Yeah,
set of
the prequels. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Like I remember, I was more of a believer in a personal deity. Now my beliefs are very complicated. But like I'm like, I was genuinely, I was sincere. Please
yeah.
don't let me die before these come out. I've been waiting since 1983 to see these damn things. Okay, I gotta see them. And then they come out. And I'm like, really? That's it? I mean, I didn't hate him as much as other people did. Like, I have friends of mine that are like, "Oh man, you might as well spit on the Eucharist or something weird," And like it was just like
I
blasphemy to them. Like, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't, but it was very disappointment.
you know
I felt like it was a waste of like a wish.
well, I think in this situation, I always feel like whatever deity it is that you speak to
Right.
understands the desire to to understand to see yourself in a story and to connect with the story, and if that
100%.
involves I just think that's a very human thing, and I think
It
that
is. It is. You want to participate in something that you've loved since your childhood, and whatever else, and
yes.
so now I'm fixated on holograms. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But that's one of the things I love
Like I
about.
said, we'll see.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about sci-fi is again all this like technological innovation that you get to imagine and speculate on, and then all of a sudden a scientist goes, "Hey, you remember the one thing I read when I was a kid? That's a cool idea. Let's make a laser beam." They have the technological scientific
Well,
wherewithal
I
to
mean,
actually do that.
so I was, I watched Star Trek the original series. My dad had a bunch of the episodes on VHS. I'm
Yep.
dating myself. But I also watched all of Next Generation, and I love when you watch those episodes now because okay, granted we're not communicating this way, but all of these are that's the small version of the tricorder or the I mean, and the whole video call. Like sometimes I think about that and I think about what that would be like if I could tell high school me that this is what this is going to be like, it would sound completely foreign to me. We have just accelerated technology so much that it would be if you took somebody from 1993 and dropped them in the middle of 2024, I'm not exactly sure they would know like what's happening because we spend so much of our time differently. I find that
Right.
fascinating. And a lot of that tech that they have on Next Generation is some version, and it probably because, again, some engineer, really smart person watched the show and thought, yeah, I can do this.
I can do that.
So
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is amazing. I absolutely adore cell phones because even as a kid, I always wondered what would it be like to like mythologically the Oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece, and like
sure.
Socrates and those guys would go there and like ask it something and supposedly get an answer. I don't know if they did, but like wouldn't that be cool to like be able to do that? Now I have one. I can ask this thing just about any question I want and get an actual answer, a legitimate answer. I can talk to anybody. I can watch anything. I can hear anything. It's just unbelievably cool to have this thing. And it's in the you, by the way, just so you know, to put this in perspective, your cell phone has more computational power than all of NASA did in the 1960s space program. And I'm not kidding.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't
It's
that
unbelievable.
amazing? And then I think about it. I'm like, why are we not back on the moon? What's going on, people? Like, come
No,
on. I
that's
mean,
probably politics. Probably.
well, yeah, politics and money.
Yeah,
I mean, and I'm yeah, I'm very interested in that. And I find that completely I mean, part of that is you think about that and you're like, holy cow, is that courageous? I mean, we didn't know any differently then, but you're like, to your point, we can do anything with this. In fact, most of the time, other than writing, I'm not really using a desktop or laptop computer anymore. I'm doing everything from my phone, which I have with me constantly, which is its own issue. I was interested to see.
That comes with some baggage too, but yeah.
It does, and I am, yeah, it really does.
Some
Um,
codependency for sure.
Seriously, like I noticed too, especially when and this is an anxiety thing, which means it may just be unique to me, but whenever I'm anxious about something, whether it's, whatever it is, anything, a phone call I have to make that I'm nervous about or whatever, if I scroll, then I feel better. I scroll through
Interesting.
social media, just kind of calm myself down, and I'm like, I do feel like I read less than I used to, and I think that's because some of that has taken over. So yeah, there's some not good things about it, but I always feel like,
I wonder if that's how TikTok gets you. Like
I think it probably
this
does.
compulsion to keep scrolling to
Well,
satisfy
because it's
something inside you.
from a psychological standpoint, I think it's intermittent rewards. I think that they're going to show you something that you find fascinating, and then like two, three things you're like, meh, 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 but you're going to keep going because you want to find the next interesting thing, but you don't stop after the next interesting thing because they've got you hooked into that sort of system of thinking. Um,
You
that's
just
that's
described
my
my like 3 hours this morning before I had to get up and leave. I was just on TikTok, just like, and I remember thinking, or at least feeling, sensing, I want the next thing. I want some. I'm not going
yeah,
to stop on something until I get to something interesting. And then once you get
interesting.
there, like, oh, let's keep going for the next one. And you just keep it so like, I'm not like 3 hours later. I'm like, holy Jesus, I got to stop doing this. It's craziness. No, yeah, okay.
Like then I think is interesting is like then it's generating this whole other ecosystem of apps that will stop you from scrolling too long. Like you can set it so that it'll block, certain
Oh, really?
apps, or that it'll set a timer so you can only be on TikTok for so long. So it's creating this whole ecosystem interdependent
Yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah,
it's just really really interesting. I'm also interested, although I have very strong feelings about this person as a person, but Elon Musk was talking about whatever his Neuralink thing is,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm sorry, but I would not let that man anywhere near my brain.
No,
Sorry, not
that's
gonna
crazy.
happen.
That's creepy.
But that's where science fiction has been pointing us for a long time. So I'm very interested to see. People are afraid of self-driving cars, but will they let you put a chip in? It will the next cell phone thing be a chip that then projects through your visual, cortex, so that you can see things that nobody else can see? Your
So
hologram,
that
even.
actually sounds pretty cool.
It does, but I'm like, I'm not going to space until they have a regular bathroom. I'm not getting a chip put into my head until everyone I know has a chip put in their head.
Because the first way they're going to do it, because I think the one you're referring to was something medicinal. It was like going to get rid of seizures or something, and that's going to be step one is physiology, anatomy, and medicine. It's going to, I put this in your brain, and then the lesions that you have that would otherwise cause MS won't do that because of these little electro or whatever it is, and it's going to go from there to probably something like I put this chip in your brain and you can watch TV inside your eyes. And how cool
It's
is
interesting.
that?
Except for we'll never sleep. We'll never ever sleep.
Right.
I don't have enough trouble with that. That's interesting because even before I knew about this, so in the book that's coming out in April, Ghost Station, Ophelia's my main character, Ophelia Bray, her family, they're the Brays and they own a large corporation, but they were in telecom stuff, and her grandfather or great grandfather, without looking it up, I can't remember, basically created a chip for those who were for communication, to be inserted into brains for people who could no longer communicate, whether it was because of ALS or whatever other condition might have been happening that affected that. And then basically someone else in the family went, we can make a lot of money on this, and then moved it away from the medicinal side to right. To the profit side. So yeah, I definitely think that's that medicinal aspect of it, which I hope is functional and works great for so many people who need it. But I definitely think that at least that's a step in the right direction. As for the other stuff, who knows?
Yeah, who does know? But we'll see. I don't know. There's also some environmental concerns about things like automatic cars and stuff like that too.
Yes.
Like the depletion of resources and what it was taken. Like
yes.
lithium and cobalt is controversial now because like where they're getting it from is, they actually like there's videos online you can watch of like this huge pit of people somewhere in Africa like desperately trying to get as much whatever it is, and it goes into your cell phone so that they can make money. And it's a very sad scene to watch. Do you know what I'm talking about?
And I don't know. Yeah, I do. Because because the materials you need for batteries, and whether that's like, I think even car battery, like the electronic vehicles.
Yes.
And the EVs.
Yes.
That's going to be a problem too. And I don't know. So, I don't feel like no matter what it is, which is not an excuse, because there needs to be a way to do this where we're not actively harming people, which, by the way, never seems to be the priority, but okay.
Again,
but
money's always more important than people.
But I always feel like, so let's talk about, you look back at the Industrial Revolution and you had certain jobs that could only be performed by children because they were small enough. Right. And they were, like, all right, whatever, you can go through this chimney. Yeah. Right. So I hope that we are advancing enough that we're thinking about those things farther ahead of time, rather than just accepting them. But I don't know what you do. I don't know how you advance.
I don't know how to strike the balance going in so that like everything can like kind of progress equally and justly and fairly and that kind of thing. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm not the one who makes those decisions.
Right. That's above my pay grade.
Yeah. Above my pay grade, I mean,
but it's important to be aware of it. It's important to be aware 100%. Of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. I deal with these things a lot of my Green Party show. Obviously, it's a political party, so we talk, climate change and stuff like that. That's all still very real too, and a lot of that has to do with technology. So, like, you look around the country, all the protests, the people like shutting down bridges and all sorts of stuff and getting arrested, and not just with the Israeli Gaza thing, and that's a whole other thing. But just environmental activists are like they're not at the point of like picking up arms and going after people, but they're like, if you graph it, like that's the next step, like from like shutting down like all sorts of stuff to like just a 100% armed something or another is the next step. So we'll see, because they're getting pissed off.
It's interesting. It's interesting too from the science fiction perspective again, where you're looking at, we have there's been a recent increase in cli-fi, which is climate sci-fi fiction or science fiction. Yeah. But also then, I'm looking at things when I'm, setting these stories. Earth plays a role usually. But, one of the things that I've looked at is when we get to this point, for example, Ophelia's family in Ghost Station, owns a chunk of the ocean. They own a piece of the, you know what I mean? Because that's something because your wealthier people are still going to, if they're going to stay on Earth, they're going to have resources. I think there's always been this idea that all the wealthy people will leave, but you know what? Living in space until we've advanced quite far is really uncomfortable, and difficult and dangerous. And that does not strike me necessarily as something that a lot of people are going to do until it's a lot more comfortable, which means you're going to have people like hoarding resources here. And doing things like, this is my chunk of the ocean. What are you doing here? I don't know.
My chunk of the ocean. That's that sort of like level or degree of like property always like baffled me. Oh, this is my mountain range. What do you mean it's your mountain? Did you make it?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, This is a great conversation, and I would love to talk to you more, but I want to let you go, and I need to go attend to some things around 5, or say whatever it is, whatever time it is, by the top of the hour. Have you heard of the book Kraken Calling? Okay. It's by a guy named Eric McBay, ARIC, and he's an environmental activist that started a group called Deep Green Resistance. He's left the group since then. They had some like disagreements on things. That's his sci-fi book. Like, what would you call it? Cli-fi?
Sci-fi, like climate
Sci-fi.
fiction. Yeah.
Sci-fi, that makes more sense. That's his book like that. It's his fictional book of what he thinks is going to happen in the near to not so distant future concerning the climate change and climate change and environment and everything else. I have yet to read it. I interviewed him on my show. Very, very interesting guy, very intelligent guy. So I'm gonna get to that soon. But Kraken Calling, if you're interested.
Check that out. I'm always very interested because you see these things, especially I'm gonna just use 2 examples quick off the top of my head, which is New York and Florida. My sister lived in Manhattan for a long time, and when it rains really hard, the subway tunnels flood.
They had some serious problems. Yeah, no.
It will eventually not be able to be functional unless something changes.
Eventually the water's not going to go away and it's over. Okay. Yay.
Yeah.
Yay money. All right. So, thank you. Absolutely. Well, we look forward to your book coming out on April 9th, you said?
Yes, April 9th. And I swear it's not as depressing as my comments in this conversation might lead you to believe.
No, I'm sure it's fabulous, regardless. Don't pull any moral punches on these storylines. If you gotta say it, you gotta say it, right?
I do my best.
Right.
I do my best.
That sounds great. It was a great pleasure talking to you, S.A. Barnes, author. Stay tuned for April 9th, and when the book comes out, and it's called Ghost Station, right?
Ghost Station, yes.
Yes, and check her out online.
I don't know.
She has a slew of books. Last one that I read was Dead Silence, and it was a wonderful story. And she has some like teenage level books with what is it, The Goth and the Ghost? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Ghost and the Goth is out as ebook, and I have the Project Paper Doll series if you like YA sci-fi, and then I have 2 that are straight up romance that were a lot of fun to write, 738 Days and Starlight Nights. But my sci-fi horror is under S.A. Barnes. Those are all under Stacey Cade. So kind of gotcha. I'm 2 people online. So
cool. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in to Let's Talk Lake County. See you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I had a great time.